Hello YouTube, it's Mr. Magz here, and today on Stupid Nintendo Articles, I'm going over an article titled, Is the Switch Getting Too Many Ports? Now, if you watch my video where I analyze the different types of reactions to Nintendo Directs, this article, I feel, would fall under the goalpost mover category. The people that always complain about stuff, but then when that thing is actually fixed, they just complain about something completely different. Or they say, oh, it's not enough, or like just stuff like that. They're never satisfied with what Nintendo or any company is doing. This is a very similar situation where this guy is complaining about the fact that the Switch is getting too many ports, even though for the past year or so, I've actually seen this guy write an article about the fact that the Switch doesn't have enough games. So now, even now that the Switch is getting more games, you're not complaining that, oh, these games aren't the games you want, they're just a lot of ports. So, yeah, I'll read the article now. Let's get started. The Nintendo Switch has roared out of the gate and has quickly made Nintendo a relevant player in the console side of video game business again. Now, I personally have never been the biggest fan of the distinction between handhelds and consoles. Because, like, what's really the difference between them outside of the way you play them? Because Nintendo has always been relevant in the handheld market, like, way more than any other competitor outside of the iPhone and whatnot, which aren't dedicated handheld devices. So, framing it like, oh, they're finally relevant again, when they've been killing it in their handhelds is a bit shady in my opinion. This was accomplished through a combination of offering interesting hardware that features a unique selling point and pairing it with games that typically only come out once every few years, like the smash hit titles Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey. But one of the most important reasons as to why the Switch is finding the success the Wii U didn't is how Nintendo has managed to plug the holes in its release calendar, delivering a major release almost every 30 days in the Switch's first year, but has the system built too much of its catalog on old games. Now, this is actually a kind of fair point. There have been quite a few ports to the system. I will give them that. One of the first big games that came out towards the beginning of the Switch's launch, essentially the April release last year, was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now, granted, they added a bunch of new stuff to that game. They had new characters, a new battle mode, a better online system. So, it's not like an entirely new game, but it definitely was an improvement over the old Wii U game. But yes, there have been and are going to be quite a number of ports. So, it's not really an issue that this is happening, since I always say that more games is never a bad thing. The issue comes when these games seemingly take the place of new games in those franchises. Like, with the PlayStation 4, did that system get a bunch of ports in its first year? It did. Now, I personally don't know if I really see that as a problem per se, since we weren't going to get a new Last of Us game for a long time. But something like God of War 3, especially since it was only the third one, and it wasn't just, oh, we're holding them over until the next God of War comes out, because that was 4 years later. They only released the third one, not a collection, just the third one. It was just a really weird situation. And there were a couple other weird ports like that. And even now, the PS4 and Xbox One, a lot of their lineup is just last gen ports, which is not really a problem, except it kind of makes me feel like third parties and even some first parties are being kind of lazy. Like, they're not really, prioritizing new games in these franchises right now. So instead of putting effort into new games, they're just going to put out the old games. I don't really feel like this is Nintendo's goal here, because especially with Mario Kart, we know that a new Mario Kart is going to come in the next 2 or 3 years. There's always a new Mario Kart every Nintendo system. They're not just going to ride out Mario Kart 8 through the end of the Switch's lifetime. Or at least I personally wouldn't do that if I was Nintendo. Same thing with Pokken Tournament Deluxe. They added a new character in the Decidueye, and now they're having new DLC on top of it. So it is a port, but it's an enhanced port with new DLC. So it is different, and there's a very high possibility that we could get a new Pokken tournament game in the next year or two. So I hope I made my point there. Let's continue. During the Switch's reveal presentation in January of 2017, we got to see a whole bunch of games coming to the system. Titles like 1-2 Switch, ARMS, Splatoon 2, and Project Octopath Traveler would all be brand new experiences for the system and the showpiece game. And the showpiece game, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, will be launching on the same day for the Wii U and Switch. But the Switch also got a ton of other announcements on that day. In fact, 14 other games were shown off that constituted of ports for the new system. Of course, this is usually par for the course when a new, unproven system is due for release, especially coming off the lackluster performance of the Wii U. But now that the Switch is an established success, shouldn't it be getting a lot more original and simultaneous releases rather than more ports? Now, yes, every single system that comes out gets a lot of older ports. When the Wii U came out, it had over 30 games at launch, and I think only 3 of them were actually exclusive. Almost all of them were older ports. I think one of the only actually newer games that came out was the new Ninja Gaiden game. Other than that, like Mass Effect, Batman, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, all of these were ports or multiplats. And something that I kind of feel people don't really think about when making this argument is the fact that the Switch did come after the Wii U. You said here it was a lackluster performance of that system that caused a lot of third parties to not jump on board immediately with the Switch. Bethesda was honestly one of the only developers that went all in from the beginning. They revealed that Doom was releasing before Skyrim even came out, and the same thing with Wolfenstein. Now, Wolfenstein is coming way later this year, just because it wasn't ready. All these third parties, they wanted to wait a little while just to see how this system would perform. They didn't want another Wii U situation where even if they did put their games in the system, they wouldn't sell. So they didn't feel like wasting their time. And I can kind of understand that. Now, it does seem a bit hypocritical for them to just instantaneously put their games on the Xbox One or the Xbox 360 when the Xbox original didn't really sell that well. And also the Xbox One isn't selling amazingly, and they're instantaneously going all in on the Xbox One X when the Xbox One hasn't sold that well. Like it's a bit, they're being a bit hypocritical there, but the Xbox brand is like a more powerful brand than what the Wii U was, so I can understand that. But basically what I'm getting at is a lot of third parties, they weren't just going to jump and put their games on the Switch as soon as it was announced. And even if they did want to put their games like as close to launch as possible, it would have taken some time for these games to be developed for the Switch. One reason why Wolfenstein is coming as late as it is because it was made for the PC and PS4 and Xbox. It wasn't developed specifically for the Switch. It had to be ported to it, which takes more time. Same thing with a lot of these other games. If we did get something like Soul Calibur or Monster Hunter or Assassin's Creed, they'll come like 6 or even more months later just because it takes some time for these games to be ported to the system. So far, Nintendo has been far and away the worst culprit when it comes to bringing their older games to the Switch, with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Pokken Tournament DX hitting the system before the end of summer. And this trend seems to be continuing into 2018 with Bayonetta 1 and 2 and Hyrule Warriors both confirmed for the early part of the year, and other marquee Wii U games like Super Mario Maker and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, both heavily rumored for release on the Switch at some point. Funny how you completely leave out Donkey Kong, when arguably Tropical Freeze is actually the worst offender of this, being released as a brand new game for $60 with just one new character mode added. Like with Bayonetta 1 and 2, it makes sense that's being re-released for $60. No one really bought that game in the Wii U. Granted, it sold about 1 million, but still, that game deserved to sell way more. Hyrule Warriors has already been released 2 separate times, each time getting more and more content. I think both the 3DS and the Wii U version had separate season passes. So now the Hyrule Warriors that's coming out on the Switch has all that content in one place. So, in my opinion, that game is well worth the $60. And Smash Wii U and Mario Maker, they haven't been announced yet. Would I personally be excited if they were announced? Yeah, because something like Mario Maker, it's more or less a platform title. You don't necessarily, it's kind of like Minecraft. You don't necessarily need to have a Mario Maker 2. You can just release Mario Maker again, maybe with some more features and content in there, and just call it another Super Mario Maker. It being a port wouldn't be that big of a deal. Kind of the same with Smash Bros. The way the Wii U Smash Bros. Works, it's kind of the perfect marriage between the melee and brawl styles of play, where it's not as fast as melee, but it's definitely not as sluggish as brawl was. It's a perfect medium. So if they just had Smash Wii U, changed up a couple of character balances here and there, added some more characters and stages, mixed the stages between of the Wii U and 3DS versions, it's not a brand new game, but it's essentially, it would definitely be worth that $60. These ports, while of games that are in some cases already pushing 3 to 4 years in age, are finding new life on the Switch, and its motivating fan base. Its motivated fan base believing some Wii U owners that move to Switch, wondering if they will just be left with older games to hold them over until the next new Switch game lands. Now, yes, it is a kind of annoying, considering how I personally bought Mario Kart 8. I bought Hyrule Warriors. I bought Pokken Tournament. And seeing how these games are essentially the game of that month is a bit disappointing per se, but I personally don't really feel like these games are taking the place of other big Nintendo releases. We have Kirby Star Allies coming in March. We have Mario Tennis Aces coming sometime in the spring. We know Pokemon and Metroid are coming sometime either next year or this year or early next year. Just because they revealed a bunch of ports in that last January Direct doesn't mean there aren't more games coming. There very easily could be more games that just happen to take more time than Nintendo was expecting, so they just made a bunch of quick ports to fill in those gaps. Nintendo very easily probably wanted Fire Emblem to be that May title, but it was taking longer than expected, so they decided to push that back and just go ahead and announce Hyrule Warriors and Donkey Kong for the spring. I could be wrong about that, but that just makes sense. That just makes sense to me personally. But there is a bit of a precedent for this type of thinking from Nintendo. Going from the GameCube and its 21 million units sold to the Wii and that system's runaway success, they needed to fill out the release calendar with titles to satisfy an install base hungry for games to play. This led to the new Play Control series of games that includes GameCube hits ported from the Wii with new control options that take advantage of the Wiimote and Nunchuck combination. This lineup includes Pikmin, Pikmin 2, Mario Tennis, Power Tour, Metroid Prime Trilogy, and Donkey Kong Jungle Beat that helped fill in the gaps in the release schedule. However, unlike the Switch Deluxe games, most of these re-releases weren't full price offerings and did not include any new content outside of being able to play the games in widescreen and with motion controls. So directly comparing these two generations of ports isn't a perfect science, but it does show that Nintendo is willing to pad its lineup with older games during a lull. That last sentence was a doozy. So I don't really understand what you're trying to say there. You start out by saying it's like this is par for the course for Nintendo to do this. They've ported older games to the newest system before. But then you say, oh, it's not a perfect science because those games in the past don't have deluxe content. It's almost like while you were reading that, you almost kind of realized why the games that are being ported now are worth $60, since they do have newer content and you can play them on the go, so it's a new way to play them. I don't know, that entire paragraph just seems kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. But I mean, I guess it is kind of a nice viewpoint a nice perspective to have, going back and seeing, oh, Nintendo has kind of done a similar thing in the past, so it would make sense that they do a similar thing now on the Switch. In addition to Nintendo re-releasing its older titles for the Switch, third-party developers have also jumped onto this trend, supporting the Switch with games that honestly never had a shot of landing on the Wii U, even in that system's heyday. Already the Switch has gotten the likes of Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Doom, Disgaea 5 Complete, LA Noire, and Dark Souls Remastered, all making their way to the system, albeit years after their release in other formats. Hold up. You're including LA Noire and Dark Souls Remaster, even though those two games are coming out day and date with other systems. LA Noire didn't come out like a month or even a year after the PS4 and Xbox One version. LA Noire Remaster came out in November with the other system. I think November 14th or something like that. Same thing with Dark Souls Remastered. It's coming out everywhere in this coming May. So I don't really understand why you would include those two in there. And then, well, I can understand why you include them, but then say, oh, these games are coming out years after the original release. And also, Skyrim is ported to literally everything. If they could fit it on the 3DS, they would. Same with the Vita. If they could fit it on either of those systems, they would. If there's a mobile Skyrim, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a like a phone or tablet version of Skyrim. So including Skyrim in there is also a bit iffy, especially since they just ported Skyrim to the PS4 and Xbox One in late 2016. So it's not really that big of a deal that Skyrim is coming to the Switch, since it comes to literally everything that was in the Wii U. But unlike the ports that did hit the Wii U, Mass Effect 3, Batman Arkham City, these games are actually selling well and keeping the Switch momentum going strong into 2018. Again, I don't really see what your point is there. Yes, actually, Disgaea 5 has already sold over 500,000 units just on the Switch. Now, Disgaea is a pretty niche series, so it's selling 500K is really, really good. But yeah, Mass Effect 3 and Batman Arkham City. Batman Arkham City sold decently. I think it maybe sold 400K. But Mass Effect, it wasn't a good port anyway. And also, the trilogy came out like the month after Mass Effect 3 came out in the Wii U. But the trilogy didn't come out on the Wii U. That system, or that game, was just screwed from the beginning. It was not going to sell. And that's a big difference maker for the Switch. People are actually buying its ports, proving once and for all that the problem with the Wii U wasn't its software lineup, but its unappealing hardware. That kind of sounds like false equivalence, because it wasn't just the fact that the hardware was kind of underpowered compared to, especially compared to the PS4 and Xbox One. It wasn't just the fact that the gamepad was a bit cumbersome at times. It was the fact that no one, even Nintendo at times, no one really tried with the Wii U. A lot of third parties put their games out at the very launch of the system, and then nothing. Ubisoft kind of hanged out there for a little while, then they just kind of stopped as well. After 2014, just nothing was coming out for the Switch outside of first party titles. And even then, almost every single first party title that came out outside of Splatoon was a very safe bet. So it wasn't just the fact that its software lineup wasn't great, it was the fact that third parties and even Nintendo just didn't really put anything in the system that was a huge system seller. If more third parties had put their games in the system to start with and just tried to ride it out for a year or two, pretty sure the Wii U would have sold way better. Because that was honestly the Wii U's main complaint, at least at first, was the fact that it had no third party support. If the Switch had, if the Wii U had more third party support, then I almost guarantee it would have sold, if not double, at least 20 million. But yeah, after there wasn't much to play in the system for the first year or two, then people started to kind of realize the Wii U as a whole wasn't really that great of a system. Which I personally still love it, but I can definitely understand its flaws. But that doesn't change the fact that those of us out there who invested heavily into Nintendo's previous system should feel a, a bit burned being asked to pay full price again for arguably better versions of games they already played back when they were known. They are better versions. You can take them on the go. They're full 1080p. Almost all of them have new content. So, I have a particular issue with the upcoming release of Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, which is the third release of the game that seems to get more and more content every time it comes out, but never goes down in price. Yeah, it gets more and more content every time, so why would it go down in price? Actually, technically, it did go down in price when it was released on 3DS for $40, because that's just what 3DS games go for. But why would Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition be less expensive than the Wii U version when the Definitive Edition has maybe double the content? I think it has like almost 20 more characters than the original Hyrule Warriors. And a lot more maps, new story missions. It makes perfect sense to me for it to be at least as expensive as the Wii U version. Because as it is, with all the season pass stuff, with all the 3DS content, that's $120 value, essentially, for $60 if you take into account everything you would have had to pay for in order to play it to its fullest on the Wii U and 3DS. Now you get it for $60, and you can take it on the go and on your TV, just right there. And again, why are you complaining about Hyrule Warriors when arguably Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is the bigger offender here? It's a full price experience, $60, with just one new character, and it's actually being sold for more than the Wii U version was. The Wii U Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze came out at $50. Now, supposedly, they're selling it on the Switch at $60. Which, if it is at $60, I honestly might wait for a price drop for that game. Because I was planning on getting it if it was like $50 or less. But now that I'm seeing it at $60, I'm not sure if I'm going to buy it day one. Maybe if I see a price drop or a bundle or something, I might look into it. But right now, I'm not going to be paying $60 for Donkey Kong. And I wouldn't be surprised if that game doesn't do as well as it could, given the price. But yeah, it wouldn't make sense for a lot of these games to have a lower price than the Wii U version, considering they almost always have more content. Especially Bayonetta 1 and 2, which is two games for the price of one, whatever. Maybe that's just part of the Switch's recipe for success. The Wii U was a failure in almost every measurable quantity, and this new system is not, so it only makes sense for Nintendo to put as many games on the shelf as possible for the Switch. Although this does come at a bit of a price, as so much of the Switch's lineup consists of ports of older games, especially if you happen to own a Wii U. And here's another kind of issue with arguments like this. The majority of people who have a Switch right now did not own a Wii U. The Switch has already outsold the Wii U in almost every region. It's already outsold Lifetime in Japan, in Canada, in Germany, in France. I think it's getting close to it in the States. So almost everyone who has a Switch right now, almost everyone who has a Switch and everyone who is going to get a Switch, because it's not going to stop selling, especially by May, those numbers could easily be in the 20 millions by May when Donkey Kong comes out. And considering how that game only sold about 1 million on the Wii U, it could easily sell that in May with the 20 million install base. A lot of people who didn't own a Wii U are looking into the Switch, so games like Bayonetta 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Pokken Tournament Deluxe, Donkey Kong, Hyrule Warriors, a lot of these games are new experiences to these people. So it makes sense to try to sell them again. And like I said before, I personally don't feel like these games are taking away from the development of sequels, especially since we know that Bayonetta 3 is coming out. I've already gone on record stating that I wasn't going to buy ports for the Switch, and to be fully honest, I broke that promise already, having picked up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but I want to see what's new for the Switch and not what's old. And there's the problem. Again, you're complaining about the fact that the system is getting games, but they're older games, even though we know that newer games are coming out. Like I said, we know that Pokemon, Metroid, Kirby, Yoshi, Mario Tennis, we know that all these games are coming out probably this year. Also, Fire Emblem. We know these games are coming out this year or early next year. So it's not really that big of an issue that these games are taking longer to come out than they thought. Like, probably Yoshi also was going to be a spring title, but they just wanted to put more time into it. So they thought, let's port over Donkey Kong, another platformer, to hold them over until Yoshi comes out. And who knows, maybe someone is making a new Donkey Kong game. We don't know. Even if we did know that, they're not going to announce a new Donkey Kong game for this year since Tropical Freeze is coming out this year. It kind of worked for Bayo 3 because, unlike Donkey Kong, you kind of need to know the full story of Bayonetta in order to understand the third one, so it makes sense to port over 1 and 2 on one cartridge for $60. That just makes sense. So yeah, these ports aren't taking the place of new games. The Direct Mini just happened to announce all these ports just so they can get them out of the way, and maybe a Direct in March or April can shed light on what they have for the rest of the year and so on. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the Switch is getting too many ports? Are you planning on buying any of these Wii U ports to the Switch? What Wii U games or third-party games would you like to be ported to the Switch? Let me know all those in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next time.